I'm Leah, 34, a successful architect living in a house I designed myself, valued at $980,000. My life seemed perfect until last week when my parents called from their European vacation. After our usual chat, Dad forgot to hang up. What I overheard shattered my world. "She's such a burden," he sighed to Mom, unaware I was still listening. If you're watching this, drop a comment telling me where you're from, hit that like and subscribe button, and stay for what happened next. You won't believe what a burden can accomplish. Growing up, I always felt cherished by my parents, Thomas and Eleanor Wilson. Our home in suburban Massachusetts was filled with laughter, encouragement, and what I thought was unconditional love. Dad, a high school principal with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, always made time for my science projects and softball games. Mom, an elegant English literature professor, nurtured my creative side, spending weekends taking me to museums and helping with art projects. When I showed an early interest in architecture, drawing elaborate floor plans for dollhouses at age 7, they seemed genuinely proud. Dad converted our garage into a studio where I could work on my designs. Mom filled our bookshelves with architecture books and took me on trips to see famous buildings. They celebrated each academic achievement and supported me through the challenges. I remember Dad driving 5 hours to bring me my forgotten portfolio for a college interview. Mom stayed up all night helping me complete project models before deadlines. Their sacrifices for my education were substantial. They took second jobs to pay for my architecture program at Cornell. Mom postponed her sabbatical, and Dad delayed his retirement. At the time, I saw this as proof of their unwavering dedication to my dreams. They attended my graduation with tears of pride, telling everyone their daughter was going to design buildings that would change skylines. My career path after college was challenging but successful. I worked at 3 different firms, gaining experience and building my reputation. Long hours, demanding clients, and creative pressure became my normal. Each promotion was celebrated with family dinners, where my parents would toast my success. When I won my first design award at 29, they framed the certificate and hung it in their living room, proudly showing it to everyone who visited. 5 years ago, I got the opportunity to design my own home, a modern 2-story with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a wooded area. The process was exhilarating, creating a space perfectly tailored to my needs and aesthetic. My parents seemed thrilled, helping with color choices and furniture shopping. Dad installed some of the light fixtures himself, while Mom planted a garden using varieties from my childhood home. The house became my sanctuary and greatest achievement, a physical manifestation of my success and independence. Despite my growing career, family remained my priority. I turned down a prestigious position in London because it would have taken me too far from home. The international travel and salary increase were tempting, but I couldn't imagine being thousands of miles from my parents as they aged. They had always been there for me, so I wanted to be there for them. I hosted Sunday dinners, planned birthday celebrations, and organized family vacations. 2 years ago, when Mom needed knee surgery, I took 3 weeks off work to help with her recovery, cooking meals and driving her to physical therapy appointments. When Dad had trouble with the new technology at his school, I spent weekends teaching him how to use it effectively. I genuinely enjoyed being involved in their lives, never considering it a burden. The past year has been particularly difficult for me personally. My relationship with James, my boyfriend of 3 years, ended when he accepted a job in Seattle without discussing it with me. The breakup left me questioning my judgment and worth. Work became more stressful with 2 major projects running simultaneously, and a new firm partner who seemed determined to challenge my design decisions. Through these struggles, my parents appeared sympathetic and supportive. They invited me for comfort meals, listened to my frustrations, and offered advice. Mom sent encouraging texts daily, and Dad called weekly to check on my mental health. When I broke down crying during Easter dinner, they assured me everything would be okay, that I was strong and would overcome these challenges. Their support seemed genuine and unconditional. At least that's what I believed until that fateful call. Last Tuesday started like any other workday, except I was completely exhausted. I'd spent the previous night finalizing renderings for a commercial complex, a project with an impossible deadline and a client who kept changing specifications. My eyes burned from staring at the computer screen for 14 hours straight, and my back ached from hunching over my desk. The morning brought 3 crisis meetings and a heated exchange with a contractor who hadn't followed the blueprints correctly. By lunchtime, I had consumed 4 cups of coffee, but hadn't eaten anything. My assistant Jordan looked concerned when he brought in another stack of documents needing immediate attention. "You should take a break," he suggested, placing a sandwich next to my keyboard. I barely acknowledged him, too focused on correcting measurements that could delay construction by weeks. My parents had been traveling through Europe for the past 3 weeks, a retirement gift to themselves that they'd been planning for years. Their itinerary included Paris, Rome, Barcelona, and Vienna, places they'd always dreamed of visiting. Each city brought excited phone calls describing architectural marvels I'd studied in school, delicious meals in quaint restaurants, and encounters with locals who showed them hidden gems off the tourist path. Despite my chaotic work schedule, I looked forward to these calls. Their joy was infectious, and for a few minutes, I could forget about my own stress. That Tuesday, I knew they'd be calling from Venice, their final stop before returning home. I cleared a half-hour in my calendar, determined to be fully present for our conversation. When my phone rang at exactly 3:30 in the afternoon, I stepped away from my desk to a quiet corner of the office. "Hello," I answered, smiling for the first time that day. "Leah, darling." Mom's voice came through, slightly breathless with excitement. "Venice is absolutely magical, even better than we imagined." Dad joined in, describing gondola rides through narrow canals, historic churches, with intricate mosaics, and the way sunlight danced on the water at sunset. They took turns sharing stories about getting lost in winding alleyways and stumbling upon a small family restaurant where they had the best seafood pasta of their lives. "How are things with you?" Mom asked eventually. "Is work any better this week?" I sighed, rubbing my temple where a headache was forming. "Not really. The Riverside project is still a nightmare. The client rejected the third set of revisions, and now we're back to square one with half the time." "That's awful," Mom said sympathetically. "You work too hard." "I know you'll figure it out," Dad added. "You always do. Remember that hotel design everyone said couldn't be done? You proved them wrong then." Their encouragement felt reassuring, a reminder that I could overcome these obstacles. I shared my frustrations about the uncooperative contractor and mentioned that James had called wanting to catch up during his upcoming visit to town. "Be careful there," Mom cautioned. "Don't let him hurt you again." "I know," I agreed. "I'm not sure I'll even see him." We chatted for another 10 minutes about their plans for the last days of their trip and their flight details for returning home that weekend. Dad mentioned needing to pack soon for an early morning departure the next day. "All right, honey, we should go. It's getting late here," Dad finally said. "Love you. Love you both. Travel safe," I replied, already mentally returning to work problems. "Bye, sweetie," Mom said, and I heard what I thought was the call ending, but it didn't end. There was no disconnection tone, just a sudden muffling sound, like someone putting a phone in a pocket. I was about to hang up when I heard Dad's voice, now distant and clearly not meant for me. God, that was exhausting. Mom's response came immediately. "I know, every call is the same lately." "I love her, but honestly, I'm tired of hearing about work problems and ex-boyfriend drama." Dad continued, his voice holding an irritation I'd never heard before. "It's always something with her." "She does unload everything on us," Mom agreed. "She's 34, but sometimes acts like she's still in college, expecting us to solve all her problems." My hand tightened around the phone. Surely I had misheard or misunderstood. These couldn't be my parents talking, not the people who had always been my biggest supporters. "Remember when we were her age?" Dad continued. "We had you a mortgage and 2 careers to manage. We didn't call our parents every time something went wrong." "I was thinking the same thing," Mom replied. "We raised her to be independent, but sometimes I wonder if we did too much for her." I stood frozen, unable to hang up, but desperately wishing I could unhear these words. Then came the statement that would change everything. "She's such a burden." Dad sighed heavily. "We've done so much for her, put our lives on hold for years for her education and career. And now we can't even enjoy our vacation without these daily therapy sessions." "I'm exhausted with her problems," Mom admitted. "I was actually dreading today's call. Is that terrible of me?" "No, I feel the same way. I love her, but sometimes I wish we could just have our own lives without constantly managing her emotional crises." I finally found the strength to end the call, my finger trembling as it hit the red button on the screen. The office around me continued as normal people talking on phones, printers, humming keyboards clicking. But my world had just imploded. A burden. That's what I was to them. Not a beloved daughter, not a source of pride, but a burden they wished they could escape. I somehow made it through the rest of the workday on autopilot, nodding at appropriate moments in meetings and signing documents placed before me. Inside, a storm was raging. Every memory of my relationship with my parents was being re-examined through this new, painful lens. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me, their words playing on endless repeat in my mind. She's such a burden. The phrase echoed with each rotation of the blades. I felt short of breath, my chest tight with anxiety. Around 3 in the morning, I moved to the living room sofa wrapped in a blanket despite the warm spring night, feeling suddenly cold to my core. As dawn broke, I began mentally reviewing every interaction with my parents over the years. The proud smiles at my graduation, were they genuine or performed out of obligation? The late night calls when I needed advice, were they answering out of love or duty? The Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations, were they secretly counting the minutes until they could be free of me? Signs I had missed now seemed obvious. Mom sometimes checked her watch repeatedly during our conversations. Dad occasionally seemed distracted when I discussed work challenges. Their encouraging words often followed a similar pattern, as if rehearsed rather than heartfelt. Had I been so self-absorbed that I missed their growing resentment, I remembered last Thanksgiving when I overheard Mom telling Aunt Susan, "We're always there for Leah. Sometimes it's a lot, but that's parenthood." At the time, I thought she was just acknowledging the normal demands of family relationships. Now the comment held new meaning, revealing a burden they carried, rather than a bond they cherished. During Christmas the previous year, Dad had made a comment about finally being able to travel more now that Leah is settled. I had interpreted this as pride in my independence. Was it actually relief that they could start living for themselves? The renovation of their kitchen last spring had been postponed twice. Mom had said it was due to contractor issues, but now I wondered if they had diverted funds to help me with the down payment on my house. A payment I had always seen as a generous gift, but perhaps they viewed as yet another sacrifice they were obligated to make. Even the weekly calls I thought were motivated by their interest in my life might have been perceived as demands on their time. The care packages Mom sent during stressful project periods, the surprise visits from Dad when I was going through the breakup with James, all these gestures of support now felt tainted. I tried desperately to rationalize what I'd heard. Perhaps they were just having a bad day. The stress of travel could make anyone irritable. Maybe they didn't really mean what they said. But the conviction in their voices, the specific examples they cited, and the easy agreement between them suggested these weren't momentary frustrations, but long-held feelings. Later that morning, my phone rang with Mom's ringtone. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the answer button. Taking a deep breath, I accepted the call and forced normality into my voice. "Hi, Mom. How's Venice today?" "Rainy, unfortunately," she replied. "We had to cancel our boat tour, but we found a lovely museum instead. How are you, sweetie? You sound tired." The concern in her voice sounded genuine, which only confused me more. How could this caring mother be the same person who called me a burden just yesterday? "Just work stress," I managed to reply. "Deadline coming up." "Don't push yourself too hard," she advised. Your health is more important than any project." We talked for about 15 minutes. They were planning to bring me a Venetian glass paperweight and asked about my schedule for the weekend after their return. Did I want to come over for a welcome home dinner? They missed me and wanted to share all their travel stories in person. The entire conversation felt surreal. Their warmth and affection seemed authentic, yet I now knew it masked a different reality. Every "I love you" and "we miss you" felt like lines from a script rather than genuine emotions. I agreed to dinner, promised to get more rest, and said goodbye with a cheerfulness I didn't feel. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen counter, staring at the fruit bowl Mom had given me as a housewarming gift, and made a decision. I couldn't confront them with what I'd heard, at least not yet. I needed time to process this revelation, and decide what it meant for our relationship moving forward. But one thing was certain: I would never again believe in the unconditional love I thought we shared. That foundation had cracked beyond repair, and I needed to figure out how to rebuild my life on this new, unstable ground. 2 days after the devastating phone call, I found myself sitting in my home office, surrounded by the blueprints of the house I had lovingly designed. Each detail had been chosen with care, from the precise angle of the southern windows to maximize natural light to the custom-built bookshelf that perfectly fit the collection of architecture books my parents had given me over the years. The house represented everything I had accomplished and the future I had planned. But now, looking around, I felt like an imposter in my own space. The walls that once provided comfort now felt like they were closing in, holding memories of family gatherings and shared moments that had been built on false pretenses. I stared at a family photo on my desk, taken at the housewarming party 2 years ago. Mom and Dad stood on either side of me, their arms around my shoulders, all of us smiling broadly. I remembered how proud they had seemed that day, telling my friends how talented their daughter was, how this house showcased my exceptional design skills. Had they been performing even then, counting the hours until they could leave, resenting the obligation to celebrate yet another of my achievements? The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. My entire identity had been constructed around being the beloved daughter who made her parents proud, who maintained close family bonds, even while building her own successful life. With that foundation shattered, who was I now? I walked through each room of my home, seeing it with new eyes. The kitchen, where I'd hosted countless family meals. The guest room specifically designed for my parents' comfort when they visited. The back patio, where Dad and I had spent weekends building a stone fire pit. Every corner held memories now tainted by doubt. Sitting on my bedroom floor, leaning against the wall, I made a decision that surprised even me. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't continue living in a space so deeply connected to a relationship that had been revealed as partly fraudulent. I needed a clean break, a fresh start somewhere untethered to these painful revelations. Once the decision was made, a strange calm replaced the emotional chaos of the previous days. I needed a plan, and planning was something I excelled at professionally. I would approach this life change with the same methodical precision I applied to my architectural projects. First, I researched the current value of my home. The real estate market in the area was strong, and properties were selling quickly. Similar homes in my neighborhood had recently sold for well above their asking prices. A quick online valuation estimated my house at just over $1 million, but I knew if I wanted a quick hassle-free sale, I would need to price it more competitively. I contacted Amanda, a real estate agent I had worked with on a commercial project the previous year. Her expertise was in expedited sales, often helping clients who needed to relocate quickly for work. When she arrived the next day, I explained that I had an unexpected job opportunity requiring immediate relocation. It wasn't entirely untrue, as I had already begun exploring positions in other cities. If we price it at $980,000, it will sell within days, Amanda assured me after walking through the property. It's undervalued at that price point, especially with your custom features in the current market. Perfect, I replied. How soon can we list it? Amanda looked surprised by my eagerness, but quickly recovered her professional demeanor. I can have the photographer here tomorrow, listing active by Friday, and we can do an open house this weekend. Make it happen, I said with a decisiveness that seemed to come from somewhere outside myself. While the real estate process was underway, I began researching cities where I could start fresh. Seattle was immediately ruled out because of James. New York and Los Angeles seemed too obvious. Eventually, I settled on Denver, a growing city with a thriving architectural scene and a lifestyle that appealed to me. I reached out to contacts in my professional network, inquiring discreetly about opportunities. Within days, I had 3 video interviews scheduled with reputable firms. I updated my portfolio to highlight projects that would appeal specifically to each company, working late into the night to perfect my presentations. The practical aspects of my plan were coming together smoothly, but the emotional implications remained complex. Each time my parents called from Venice, I maintained the performance, sharing minor work updates and listening to their travel stories. We discussed the welcome home dinner I supposedly would be attending. I asked what I could bring suggested wines that would pair well with Mom's lasagna, and promised to arrive early to help set the table. The duplicity felt foreign to me, but also necessary. I wasn't ready to confront them with what I'd heard, nor was I willing to continue our relationship as if nothing had changed. This clean break would allow me to process my feelings without the added complication of their reactions or attempts to explain away their words. Meanwhile, I began the practical process of disappearing. I opened new bank accounts at a different financial institution, transferring funds in amounts small enough not to trigger any notifications on the joint investment account Dad had set up for me years ago. I created a new email address for professional correspondence and researched cell phone plans in Colorado. The weekend arrived, and with it came the open house. By Sunday evening, I had 7 offers all above asking price. The highest bid came from a young surgeon and his wife expecting their first child. They offered $1,020,000 with minimal contingencies and flexibility on the closing timeline. Their enthusiasm for the house reminded me of my own excitement when I first designed it, a poignant reminder of how much had changed. "They can close in 3 weeks," Amanda informed me. "Is that too soon for your relocation plans?" "No," I replied, surprising myself with my readiness. "That timeline works perfectly." As Amanda processed the paperwork, I received a video call from the managing partner at Bradshaw and Associates, a prestigious architectural firm in Denver. The interview lasted 2 hours, during which I presented my portfolio and discussed my design philosophy. By the end, I had a formal offer for a senior architect position, with creative control over residential projects, a salary increase, and relocation assistance. The pieces were falling into place with an efficiency that felt almost predestined. As I signed the acceptance letter and returned it to Bradshaw and Associates, I experienced a moment of clarity. This wasn't just about escaping the pain of my parents' betrayal. It was about reclaiming my life on my own terms, without the weight of others' expectations or judgments. I began sorting through my belongings, deciding what to take to Denver and what to leave behind. Family heirlooms and gifts were packed separately, destined for a storage unit my parents wouldn't know about. Personal items, professional materials, and practical necessities were labeled for the move. Everything else would be donated or sold. Through it all, I maintained regular contact with my parents, never hinting at the dramatic changes underway. When Mom texted a picture of Dad in a gondola, I responded with appropriate enthusiasm. When Dad called to ask if I could pick them up from the airport that Saturday, I agreed without hesitation, knowing I would send a text at the last minute about a work emergency requiring me to cancel. Each step of my plan unfolded with precision, driven by a determination I hadn't known I possessed. The pain remained a constant ache beneath every action, but it was increasingly accompanied by something unexpected, a sense of liberation. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I was making a decision solely for myself, without considering its impact on my parents or seeking their approval. 3 days before my parents' return, I finalized the closing documents for my house. The surgeon and his wife had expedited their financing, eager to take possession before the arrival of their baby. The money was transferred to my new accounts. My resignation letter was submitted to my firm with 2 weeks' notice, and my flight to Denver was booked for the day after my parents returned. All that remained was to write the note I would leave in the empty house, a task I both dreaded and anticipated. What could possibly encapsulate the complicated mix of hurt, anger, and resolve that had driven me to this point? How could I explain an action that I myself was still struggling to fully comprehend? As the sun set on what would be one of my final evenings in the house, I sat at my cleared desk with a single sheet of paper before me. After hours of drafting and discarding verbose explanations, I finally settled on the simplest, most direct communication of all. Surprise? A burden did this. 5 words that said everything and nothing, leaving them to fill in the blanks, just as I had been forced to do with their unintended confession. The week before my parents' return passed in a blur of logistics and preparations. The house closing went smoothly, and I handed over the keys to the excited new owners, a young couple starting their family. Watching them walk through what was now their home, planning where to put a nursery and discussing paint colors, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. "We'll take good care of it," the wife assured me, noticing my momentary melancholy. "Your designs are incredible. This house feels special." "It is," I admitted, "but it's time for a new chapter. The house deserves a family who will fill it with love." I didn't add that it also deserved occupants whose love was genuine, not performative. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now the one playing a role, pretending this was simply about career advancement rather than emotional survival. With the sale complete, I arranged for most of my furniture and belongings to be moved to a storage facility outside the city. Only essential items would come with me to Denver, immediately fitting into 4 suitcases and several shipping boxes. The moving company was scheduled for the day before my parents' return, ensuring everything would be gone when they arrived. The final day in my empty house was surreal. Footsteps echoed on bare floors and voices bounced off walls, no longer adorned with artwork or photographs. Jordan, my assistant, had helped coordinate the movers, and now stood in what had been my living room, concern evident on his face. "Are you sure about this, Leah?" he asked. "It seems so sudden." "I've never been more certain," I replied, surveying the empty space. "Sometimes you don't realize you need a change until the decision is already made." Jordan nodded, though his expression suggested he suspected there was more to the story than I was sharing. "Denver is lucky to have you, but we'll miss you here." "I'll miss you too," I said sincerely, grateful for his help and discretion throughout this process. "Thank you for everything, especially keeping this quiet." "Of course," he promised. "Not a word to anyone, especially not your parents until you're ready." After Jordan left, I completed a final walkthrough of the house. In the kitchen, I remembered countless dinner parties and holiday meals. In the office, late nights working on designs that would advance my career. In the guest room, my parents' frequent visits that I had always welcomed enthusiastically, believing they felt the same way. I placed my house keys and the note on the kitchen counter, where they would be immediately visible. The simplicity of surprise, a burden did this, still felt right, forcing them to confront the reality of what their words had wrought without providing the comfort of an explanation they could argue against. As I locked the front door for the final time using a spare key, I would mail back to the new owners. A profound sense of finality washed over me. This house had been more than an investment or a showcase of my design skills. It had represented my achievement of the American dream, the culmination of my parents' sacrifices and my hard work. At least that's what I had believed until a week ago. The next day, I checked into a hotel near the airport and sent my parents a text message explaining that a work emergency would prevent me from picking them up as planned. I promised to see them the following day for dinner, a promise I had no intention of keeping. Their reply expressed disappointment, but understanding, assuring me they could take a taxi and would see me soon. That evening, from the anonymous safety of my hotel room, I imagined my parents' return. Their flight would land around 8 in the evening. Accounting for customs baggage claim and the taxi ride, they would arrive home around 10, tired but happy to be back after their European adventure. I pictured them approaching the front door, luggage in tow, Dad fumbling with the key as Mom reminded him which one it was. The confusion when the key didn't fit the lock. The growing concern as they tried repeatedly. Perhaps they would think they had the wrong key, or that the lock had been changed accidentally. Eventually, they would call the neighbors or a locksmith. The revelation would come that the house had been sold, that their daughter had vanished without explanation, leaving only those 5 damning words behind. Would they immediately understand the reference? Or would it take time for the memory of that unguarded conversation to resurface? I couldn't decide which scenario would be more satisfying, an immediate recognition of their culpability, or a drawn-out realization that would mirror my own painful process of discovery. Either way, they would experience a fraction of the betrayal I had felt upon hearing their true feelings. My flight to Denver departed early the next morning. As the plane took off, I watched my city grow smaller beneath me, the familiar landscape receding until it was indistinguishable from any other urban area. In my pocket, my old phone was turned off, never to be activated again. My new phone contained only professional contacts and a few friends who had no connection to my parents. The 3-hour flight gave me time to reflect on the drastic changes of the past week. Had I overreacted? Perhaps. Was there a more mature way to handle the situation? Probably. Did I regret my decision? Not yet, though I suspected that moment might come. What I knew with certainty was that I needed this clean break to rediscover who I was without the identity of the perfect grateful daughter. I needed space to process the hurt without my parents' inevitable attempts to explain away their words or minimize their impact. And most importantly, I needed to prove to myself that I could stand completely on my own, unburdened by others' expectations, and unpropped by their support, real or imagined. As the plane began its descent into Denver, the captain announced sunny skies and mild temperatures, perfect weather for a new beginning. The coincidence made me smile, the first genuine smile in days. Whatever happened next, this was my choice, my path forward. For once, I wasn't considering how my decisions would affect my parents or seeking their approval. I was simply following my own internal compass toward healing and independence. Back in Massachusetts, my parents' return played out much as I had imagined, though I would only learn the details months later. Their taxi pulled up to what had been my house around 10:30 at night. Tired from travel, but happy to be home, they approached the front door with their luggage ready to collapse into bed after their long journey. Dad tried his key in the lock, then tried again when it wouldn't turn. Confusion quickly turned to concern as they realized something was wrong. Mom suggested they might have the wrong key, that perhaps in their jet lag state they had mixed up the house key with another on the ring. Dad tried every key they had. None worked, thinking there might have been a lock malfunction. They rang the doorbell expecting me to answer despite the late hour. Instead, a stranger appeared, a young man in his 30s wearing pajama pants and a Harvard Medical School t-shirt. "Can I help you?" he asked, understandably wary of the older couple on his doorstep near midnight. "There must be some mistake," Mom said. "This is our daughter Leah's house." The man's expression changed from suspicion to recognition. "You must be the parents," he said, his tone softening. "She mentioned you were traveling in Europe." "Yes, we just got back," Dad confirmed, increasingly confused. "What's going on? Why are you in Leah's house?" "This isn't Leah's house anymore," the man explained gently. "My wife and I bought it last week. The sale closed 3 days ago." Mom's knees apparently buckled at this news, forcing Dad to catch her before she fell. The new owner invited them inside, an awkward but compassionate gesture under the circumstances. In the kitchen, they found my note on the counter exactly where I had left it. "Surprise. A burden did this." Mom read it aloud, her voice breaking. Dad stood silent, the color draining from his face as recognition dawned. According to the new owner, they looked at each other with a mix of horror and understanding before Dad whispered, "The phone call. She heard us." What followed was a frantic attempt to contact me. Calls to my cell phone went straight to voicemail. Emails bounced back as undeliverable. My former firm would only confirm that I had resigned, citing privacy policies when asked about forwarding information. They contacted mutual friends, distant relatives, anyone who might know my whereabouts. Most were as surprised as my parents by my sudden departure. A few had received vague messages about a new opportunity requiring immediate relocation, but none knew specific details. Dad drove to my office building the next morning only to be told by security that I no longer worked there. He then went to the real estate office that had handled the sale, where Amanda reluctantly confirmed that the transaction had been legitimate and completed with all proper documentation. She couldn't legally disclose any information about my future plans. Meanwhile, in Denver, I was settling into a temporary corporate apartment provided by my new firm. The space was impersonal, but comfortable, a blank slate upon which I could begin constructing my new life. My first day at Bradshaw and Associates went well, with colleagues welcoming me warmly and immediate immersion in current projects. During that initial week, I deliberately kept busy, working long hours and spending evenings exploring my new neighborhood. I found a coffee shop with excellent pastries, a bookstore with a surprisingly good architecture section, and a park where I could run in the mornings. Normal, everyday activities that somehow felt revolutionary in their independence. My parents' attempts to reach me continued relentlessly. Though I had a new phone number, they managed to find my new email address through a professional association listing. Messages poured in, evolving from confused and hurt to desperate and pleading. Leah, please just let us know you're safe. Whatever you heard, we need to explain. We're so sorry if we hurt you. Please come home so we can talk. I read each one feeling a complex mix of vindication and guilt. Part of me wanted to respond to explain how deeply their words had wounded me. Another part knew that any contact would draw me back into the emotional dynamics I was trying to escape. So I remained silent, letting their messages accumulate unanswered. Friends reached out too, some genuinely concerned, others clearly prompted by my parents. To those I trusted most, I sent brief assurances of my well-being, without revealing my location or circumstances. To others, I maintained radio silence, unwilling to create channels through which my parents could track me down. 3 weeks into my new life, I signed a lease on an apartment in a converted historic building downtown. The space was nothing like my previous home, with exposed brick walls, industrial fixtures, and views of the city skyline rather than wooded grounds. The difference was intentional, a physical manifestation of my psychological break with the past. As I settled into my new routine, the immediate shock of my parents' betrayal began to subside, allowing more nuanced emotions to surface. Moments of doubt crept in. Had I misinterpreted their words? Had I overreacted to what might have been a momentary frustration? Was my drastic response justified by a single overheard conversation? But each time these doubts arose, I reminded myself that their words hadn't come from nowhere. They represented feelings deep enough to express to each other in private feelings they had successfully hidden behind affectionate facades for years. The performance might have continued indefinitely had Dad not forgotten to hang up the phone. And so I continued forward, throwing myself into work with an intensity that impressed my new colleagues. I designed innovative residential spaces, drawing on my personal experience to create homes that fostered genuine connections rather than performative ones. My first major project, a multi-generational family compound, won a regional design award and was featured in architectural magazines, establishing my reputation in the Denver community. Months passed, seasons changed. My parents' messages became less frequent, but no less emotional. On my birthday, Mom sent a long email recounting the day I was born, how they had chosen my name, the joy I had brought into their lives. Dad sent a separate message apologizing for anything he had ever done to make me feel undervalued, assuring me that I had always been their greatest pride. I saved these messages but didn't reply. Though the wound was healing, it wasn't yet ready for the complications of reconnection. I needed to complete my journey of redefinition before I could consider what, if any, relationship I might want with them in the future. During this period, I began therapy, working with a psychologist specializing in family trauma. Our sessions helped me untangle the complex web of emotions surrounding my parents' betrayal and my response. I came to understand that while their words had triggered my departure, the seeds had been planted long before in patterns of relating that had become increasingly unsustainable. You're not just reacting to what they said, my therapist observed during one particularly insightful session. You're reclaiming parts of yourself that got lost in trying to be the perfect daughter. This isn't just about them. It's about you becoming fully yourself. This perspective shifted my understanding of my own actions. What had begun as an escape from pain was evolving into something more constructive, a necessary separation that allowed authentic growth. The anger that had fueled my initial decision was gradually being replaced by a more complex emotional landscape that included forgiveness, not for their sake, but for my own. As my first Denver winter melted into spring, I found myself building meaningful connections in my new community. Colleagues became friends. A neighbor's dog became my regular running companion. I joined a book club focused on architectural theory and a volunteer program teaching design principles to high school students. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I was creating a life rich with purpose and genuine relationships. 6 months after my abrupt departure from Massachusetts, I had established a new normal in Denver. My apartment now felt like home, decorated with carefully selected artwork and furniture that reflected my evolving aesthetic. My position at Bradshaw and Associates had been elevated to project director following the success of my initial designs. I had made friends who knew nothing of my past family drama, who accepted me simply as the person I presented now. The wound of my parents' betrayal had scabbed over, though it would occasionally reopen when a particular memory surfaced or a holiday approached. Thanksgiving was especially difficult, as it had always been a significant family celebration. I declined invitations from colleagues, choosing instead to spend the day hiking in the nearby mountains, finding solace in nature, rather than forced festivities. By December, my parents' attempts at contact had dwindled to monthly emails, more updates on their lives than pleas for my return. They shared news about relatives' neighborhood changes and their activities, maintaining a one-sided conversation, as if someday I might rejoin it. I read these messages with increasing emotional distance, no longer feeling the sharp pain of their earlier impact. Then in January, an unexpected letter arrived at my office, forwarded through professional channels I hadn't thought to disconnect. Unlike the emails, I could easily ignore this physical manifestation of my mother's handwriting on cream-colored stationery, forced a more immediate confrontation with my past. For days, the unopened envelope sat on my coffee table, simultaneously tempting and threatening. Finally, on a snowy Sunday morning, I made a pot of tea, wrapped myself in a blanket, and opened the letter that would initiate the final phase of my journey. "My dearest Leah," Mom began, her elegant script instantly familiar. "After months of respecting your silence, I'm trying this old-fashioned approach in hopes that my words might reach you differently on paper than they have through digital means. I've written and discarded a dozen versions of this letter, none feeling adequate to express the depth of our regret and love. First, you deserve an explanation, though not an excuse. The conversation you overheard represented the worst of us in a moment of weakness. We were exhausted from travel, worried about your recent struggles, and selfishly focused on our own needs. The words were real, but represented a temporary frustration, not our enduring feelings toward you. This doesn't minimize the hurt we caused. Words once spoken cannot be unheard, and you had every right to feel betrayed. Your response, while shocking to us, forced a reckoning we perhaps needed. We've spent these months examining our relationship with you and our own failings as parents. Your father has been particularly devastated. The knowledge that his carelessness with the phone revealed thoughts he's deeply ashamed of has affected him profoundly. He's been seeing a therapist to work through his guilt and to better understand why he expressed such hurtful sentiments about the daughter he adores. His health has suffered, though he wouldn't want me to tell you that. We've learned through this painful experience how much we took your presence in our lives for granted. The house feels empty without your regular visits. Holidays passed without joy. Even simple pleasures like sharing good news or seeking advice have lost their luster without you to share them with. I won't ask you to forgive us or to return. Those decisions must be yours alone, made in your own time, if at all. I ask only that you know that our love for you, despite that terrible momentary lapse, has been the defining joy of our lives. You were never truly a burden, Leah. You were always our greatest blessing, even when we failed to remember that essential truth. Wherever you are, I hope you are finding happiness and peace. If someday you wish to reconnect, even in the smallest way, we will be here, grateful for whatever relationship you're willing to offer. With eternal love, Mom. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed for months finally came streaming down my face as I reread the letter multiple times. The sincerity felt genuine, the regret palpable in every carefully chosen word. For the first time since that fateful phone call, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that complex, flawed people could simultaneously hold contradictory feelings, that a moment of resentment didn't necessarily negate years of genuine love. My therapist had been suggesting something similar for months, encouraging me to view the incident within the broader context of our relationship, rather than allowing it to retroactively define every interaction we'd ever had. Perhaps I had been resistant to this more nuanced perspective, because the absolutism of total betrayal was easier to process than the messier reality of human relationships. Still, the hurt remained. Trust once broken couldn't be instantly restored by a single letter, no matter how eloquent or sincere. The path forward, if there was to be one, would require careful navigation of new boundaries and expectations. Over the following weeks, I considered my options. I could maintain my silence, continuing to build my new life without the complications of family reconciliation. I could acknowledge receipt of the letter, but establish firm boundaries for any future contact. Or I could begin the slow, uncertain process of rebuilding a relationship fundamentally changed by what had transpired. No option felt entirely right or entirely wrong, each carrying its own emotional risks and potential rewards. Eventually, I decided that the only way forward was through honesty, both with myself and with them. 1 month after receiving my mother's letter, I sent my response not to their home address, but to my mother's personal email, maintaining some distance while opening a channel of communication. "Mom and Dad," I wrote, "I received your letter. The months of separation have given me perspective I couldn't have gained otherwise. I've built a new life here, one that brings me fulfillment and joy independent of my identity as your daughter. This was necessary healing I didn't know I needed." The words I overheard weren't momentary. They represented feelings deep enough to express when you thought no one was listening. They forced me to question every interaction we'd ever had, wondering what was genuine and what was obligation. That uncertainty was unbearable. I'm not ready to return to our previous relationship, and I may never be. But I'm willing to consider a new one based on honesty and respect for boundaries. This would begin slowly, perhaps, with occasional emails or calls with no expectation of immediate forgiveness or restoration. I need you to understand that I'm different now. The experience changed me in ways I'm still discovering. If we rebuild any kind of relationship, it will be as adults with separate lives who choose connection rather than assume it. If this limited contact is something you're interested in, let me know and we can discuss how to proceed. If it's not enough, I understand and wish you well. Leah. Their response came within hours, expressing gratitude for the opportunity and acceptance of whatever terms I wished to set. We began with monthly emails carefully neutral in content, gradually progressing to occasional video calls where we cautiously navigated this new terrain of tentative reconnection. Throughout this process, I maintained my independence, continuing to build my life in Denver, with no plans to return east. The professional success I found there evolved into a senior partnership at the firm. The apartment became a condo I purchased and redesigned. Friendships deepened into chosen family connections that provided support and belonging. The wound of that overheard conversation never completely healed, remaining a sensitive scar that would occasionally twinge when triggered by certain words or situations. But it no longer defined my identity or dictated my choices. It became instead one significant chapter in a continuing story of self-discovery and growth. If you've ever felt undervalued by those who should cherish you, most know that your worth isn't determined by others' perception. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to walk away, not as punishment, but as protection. Has anyone else experienced this kind of family betrayal? Share your story in the comments. Like and subscribe if this resonated with you. And remember that sometimes being a burden means you're carrying truths others aren't ready to acknowledge. Thank you for listening to my journey, and may you find the strength to honor your own worth every single day.